Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar on the inner circle, what sales winners do differently. This webinar will be recorded, so feel free to sit back and relax, and we'd love to make it as interactive as possible, so feel free to ask us questions in the questions panel as well as on Twitter using the hashtag InsightSelling. I'd like to introduce you to our experts. We have Mike Schultz from Ring Group, thrilled to have him here today to hear his insights. We also have Mike Peachy from HubSpot, and myself, Amanda Sibley from HubSpot, I will be hosting today. We are going to go over the top 10 attributes of sales winners, what is insight selling, and the 3 levels of insight selling. We're going to go over the top 10 attributes separating sales winners from second place finishers. These come directly from Mike's book, Insight Selling, that will be sent out via email afterwards, so you can get into more detail there. But really quickly, we're just going to go through them all. So the top 10 attributes separating winners from second place finishers in sales is that the winners educated prospects with new ideas and perspectives, collaborated with them, persuaded prospects that they would achieve results, they listened to the prospects, they understood their needs, they helped avoid potential pitfalls, they crafted a compelling solution that was personalized, and they depicted purchasing process accurately, they connected with them, and they added overall value. Sales winners really harness the power of ideas. So next we're going to jump into what is insight selling.
Are you willing to try to do this differently? And that's the way that I actually tie down and get the person to say that they're making a commitment to trying to do things differently and to try to change. And I think that's a big turning point in any sale is when you get a yes from the prospect at that point in time.
Yes, indeed. So part of being a change agent is not just about ideas, but it's about being able to get commitment. So thanks for that, Mike. So let's just take a look. I mean, there's so many things that we would love to talk about because this this research was rich enough that it ended up being a 200-plus page book just to walk through not even all of it, but many of the key points. But let's take a look at just that top 10 list. Let's break it down to the top 3 things because the top 3 things are great labels and indicators of what these sales winners do. So the first one was that they educated me with new ideas and perspectives. We call this opportunity insight because so many people that are selling know that there's this amazing thing that buyers should be buying, either a product or a service, a new process to adopt, just some different kind of change that if they did it, their worlds would be better. Now, I asked the sellers, like, you know this, yeah? Okay, well, what are the kinds of things? And they'll tell me all about it and get all excited. And I said, if you were the buyer, would you buy it? And they said, yeah, of course. But the problem is what? Well, the buyers don't know the same things. So the challenge is communication. And who gets to communicate? Salespeople. So you are literally, the person is the conduit between an opportunity that a buyer should be taking advantage of and not taking advantage of it because of lack of knowledge. When sellers do this well, they truly inspire buyers, and for themselves, they fill the pipeline. The second thing that was one of the things that most separated sales winners from second place finishers was the buyer perceived them to collaborate with them. Now, when we talked to them about collaborating, part of it was just being a good person to interact with, like they were proactive, they were responsive, and they were easy to buy from. So that was just how they operated. We've all had sellers. If anyone's ever done a home remodel, they know it's not always easy to get people to call you back. But buyers really liked sellers that didn't make their life hard in that way. But it was more about buyers perceiving sellers that collaborated to be pursuing mutual goals together, that they were on the same team. We call that interaction insight. So part of opportunity insight is you have to share a story. You have to tell them what's possible. But it's not just about pitching. It's also about asking those kinds of questions that Mike brought up that can help you think about what am I willing to do here and to truly push buyers out of their comfort zones so they can be in that mental place ready to make change. And when the seller does that, they don't just bring them ideas, but they truly strengthen buyer decision-making. Now, the third thing that sales winners do most differently was that they would persuade buyers that they would achieve results. So there's two parts to that. There's the persuading the seller as change agent and the seller as influencer, but as well results. They were able to paint the picture of the return on investment and other kinds of emotional and life improvements that would happen because they bought something. So they focus so much on value, and they do become that change agent where the buyers do things differently and their lives become that much better. So let's just do some summaries. The research, I mentioned that we looked at it from what sales winners did, what they did most differently, what indicated that the buyers would continue to buy in the future or be most loyal to maximize repeat business, what the buyers valued the most in the sale. And when we were actually doing the research work, my wall was covered in graphs and charts and all that. And someone walked in and looked at it. Other people walked in and it just left dizzy. But someone said, Mike, if it were only this simple. So we knew that we had to break it down into something that people could consume and remember. Because if it's too complicated, it's hard to apply. So it turned out that sellers that won, we can bucket the whole thing into three labels. One is that they connected. The second was that they were convinced. And the third was that they collaborated. So let's take a quick look at connect. They connected in two ways. They connected the dots between buyer need and seller solutions, and as well they connected with people as people. So they made things like personal connections. The buyers reported much higher personal connections with the sellers that they gave the business to, and they also felt that they were highly listened to. Now, it's really kind of interesting, and you think like, oh, duh, I mean, that's what everyone knows, right? Well, when the Harvard Business Review was writing articles as recently as last year with the titles of things like the end of solution sales, which what's the premise of solution sales? Understanding need, crafting a solution that meets those needs, right? Well, that's the premise. And they said, well, the title wasn't sometimes the end of solution sales depending on the situation. It was the end of solution sales. And they said, throw it out and do something else. Well, we found the sellers that actually threw it out, they lost. It was really bad. So you don't want to throw it out. Now, the other thing was, again, it's picking on the Harvard Business Review a little bit here, but you know, they are, if something is in the Harvard Business Review, it's nothing if not a part of the credible and mainstream business conversation. They published an article called Selling is Not About Relationships. And they meant it's not about the personal relationships. Well, it turns out that the buyers that liked the sellers bought from them more often. And if they didn't make a personal connection with the sellers, they didn't buy from them. So the big point here is that not that this is the only thing, but you can't throw it out. So as we looked at the rest of the research, it turned out that the sellers that won did these things. But if they did only these things, it wasn't enough, and they lost. So they had to do more. Now, even though they had to do more, we found that if you do these things well, you can still be at least somewhat successful. I happen to know a chief financial officer of a company that was bringing the company public, and I had a conversation with him, and I asked him, how did you decide between the big four accounting firms, which one you were actually going to select to take it public? Because that's a big deal for a big four accounting firm. So he said, well, come down to my office, and he showed me this big decision-making grid with 12 factors across the top and 4 firms down the left side, and he gave them weighted average scores about how well qualified they were in each area, and he said, as you can see, the firm that we chose had a much higher score across the board, and so they were the natural, obvious best choice. And I thought, all right, wow, great, you know. What a lesson in decision making. This was several years back. And he said, you want to know where I really bought from them? And I said, sure. He said, close the door. So I closed the door, he looked at me, he said, I like them better. He said, the thing is that all four of these companies could take us public competently. But I'm the one that's going to have to work with one group of people for 10 months for 12 hours a day. And I wanted that interaction to be the strongest, and I liked them better. So it still happens, it just wasn't enough. Mike, do you see this as well, even though you're selling a real innovative solution and really changing your whole industry? What are the kinds of things that you see when it comes to either connecting the dots of needs and solutions or just that personal rapport of connecting with people?
So I see both. I think one of the places that this feels the strongest for me at HubSpot is honestly when we're selling our training and consulting. Because especially when we're moving something that is innovative and we're asking people to make change, a lot of times we're helping them so much in the sales process and we're providing all these ideas in the sales process, the consumer doesn't want that to stop. And so a big part of our sales process leading, directly into your point about just people that you like and are generally friendly and you want to do business with is, how we bring in our consultants. So a lot of times the account managers, the, dedicated consultant, I'll actually wrap these folks in during the sales process and create the introductions between the people that are really going to be working with them after they onboard onto the product and, get everyone feeling great about what being a real customer is going to be like. Because at the end of the day, I completely agree. And I've had multiple deals that I've won where people have said to me, you know what, I'm just doing this because I think that you guys really care. And I think you guys are going to be there to really help us. And I think if I have a problem, I can call you and you're going to take care of me. So that resonates beautifully with me. I completely agree. I think another point that you made that I was really, really agreeing with was the part where we talk about being on the same team as the prospect. And I think from a really tactical perspective, I've done that on almost every deal that I've won. And it's funny because you can literally ask the prospect bluntly that after I share the ideas with them, after I show them exactly what's possible, I'll just say, are you willing to make the change? Do you think this is going to help your business? They'll say, yes, I'm willing to do it. At that exact moment, I will literally say the words, okay, beautiful. This is actually a part where the sales process changes. At this point in time, I want to be your teammate. I don't want you to think that I'm trying to sell you anymore. All I'm trying to sell you on is an idea and a concept, and I've achieved that. At this point in time, let's join forces. Let's be on the same team. How can we both move this thing forward and get you what it is that you want? I can coach you on how to sell this to your management. You can coach me on how to sell this to your management, but make no mistake, we're on the same team, and all I'm here to do is support you. And that resonates really well on the phone. So I think those 2 points are really kind of key in this discussion.
Well, thanks, Mike. And even some of the things that you're saying there, one of the things that we did and we wrote about in Insight Selling the book was that a precursor to trust, and you said that they said, we think that you really care. We think that you're going to be there for us. The thing that sets up that feeling of relying on someone is initially liking them. And there's plenty of research to support that. Not that we did, but we were reading here and there that, the Mad Men days of 3 martini lunches and you really have to get to know me and then we'll buy from you. Those are gone, so don't worry about personal relationships. But what we've actually found is that they flow a little differently. So there isn't quite so much of the 3 martini lunch and let's get to know each other personally for months before we buy. What happens is that it's more of a business exchange at first, and then the personal relationship of feeling comfortable and liking the other person flows from there. So it's a different order, but it's still the same thing. And once somebody likes you, they can begin to trust you as long as you don't do anything to hurt that perception that you are trustworthy. So thanks for that, Mike. Next, so they connected. They also convinced. They convince buyers that they can provide value. Now that value tends to break down into 3 separate buckets. That there is a maximum return, that you're going to get ROI. or your life is somehow going to be better. This is the part where, especially if you're selling something that's not just plumbing that fixes the leak, if you're selling something that is truly going to make a difference for a buyer, what is that difference you're going to make? And the buyers that buy, and the bigger the sale and the more important the sale, the more they need to be able to make an impassioned plea to other people that they're trying to convince. This is the buyer, not the seller, to say, I want to do this because it's going to increase my this 20 times, and it's going to decrease my costs over here, and it's going to make us more competitive over there. They need to be able to say, we're going to get the ROI. And if that's not clear, then any sale that is important is going to fall by the wayside. The second thing after resonate is that the seller differentiates. Not only does the buyer want that, but even in real innovative areas, it doesn't take very long for competition to sprout up. So the question is, why should I buy it from them? Now, this is where, Mike, you mentioned that oftentimes for something innovative and new ideas, the competition is indifference. The competition is inertia. The more you can do number one, the more they don't want inertia because the return is so worth it. The second part is, well, what if somebody else sneaks in and you're competing against someone? Well, you have to be able to get them to see why you are the best option. Now, one of the challenges in doing that is so much of the world of differentiation is written about from the marketing side. What's your unique selling proposition? What's the one thing that separates you? What are the 3 key bullets that you hang your messaging hat on? Well, oftentimes with sales, if you went with those things, the buyer's going to say, yeah, but that wasn't what was important to me. We talked about what was important to me. So the thing is, what's going to be important to them and what's going to be important in terms of where you stand out all depends on the buyer's perception of you versus the other guy. But in any case, it's contingent upon the seller to differentiate. And the last part, a buyer might say, I really want this. I want to buy it from these guys. And then they go, for example, into, let's call it a board of directors. Not everyone does, but they go to the board of directors to make this pitch. And no, you can't be there as the seller, but they go to make this pitch about why they want to do this big thing. And the board of directors saying, all right, yeah, that sounds great, but is it going to work? Is it going to come true? Are we actually going to get the desired result? So that's a question of substantiating that. And the buyer needs to see that there's an acceptable risk or a minimum, the risk is as minimum as possible, that ROI is actually going to come together. And when those three things happen, when the seller resonates, differentiates, and substantiates, they convince the buyer that they should move forward and move forward with them. And so that is the convince category. Mike, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I would add on the substantiate piece, I completely agree. This came up on the sales floor all the time at HubSpot when we would be talking a lot about decision makers. And the concept is always that, I'm working with somebody here and I'm trying to get to a decision maker. I have to find that VP. I have to find that board member, who's going to make the call. And so many sellers in the process completely don't realize that the decision maker, in most cases, is the influencer because of exactly what you just said. That resonated so well with me of no matter who this person with the purse strings is, they're going to look your influencer right in the eyes and they're going to say, is this going to work? Do you think that this is an acceptable way for us to spend money? And so I think the biggest coaching point that I would give here is literally mocking that with your prospect. So if your prospect is an influencer, right, a quote-unquote influencer, you can literally say to them as we're coming close to the deal, if they're saying, we're going to go present this to our board, say, great. I know that they're going to ask you if this is something that you really truly believe is going to work. How are you going to respond to that? And just practicing that scenario with your prospect the whole way through, I think really gets you to that place, because at the end of the day, if that person that you're selling to and who is going to have to either operate this machine or is going to have to execute on this plan is not fully bought in, no matter what the quote-unquote decision makers say, you don't have a sale.
Right, exactly. So there you have it, connect and convince. Now let's move on to the third category, which is collaborate. So the buyers perceive the sellers that won to collaborate in two ways. One, how they interacted, like I mentioned before, that they were proactive, responsive, and easy to buy from, but as well as that they were perceived to be working with the buyers versus working against them. Now, it's also really interesting that this is where you might think educate new ideas and perspectives is in convince, but when we talk to the buyers, they said the thing that was most important to feeling like someone was really helping me make the best decisions and be the most competitive were those sellers that brought their minds to the table and that worked with me either to share ideas with me, literally present them, or as well to interact with them in such a way that they might help them think more strongly about what they should be doing, where, and why. So it was really interesting to see this because what the buyers didn't want were sellers that were perceived to be arrogant or too provocative or in any way standoffish. So much like there's the Harvard Business Review articles that say, forget about solution selling and forget about relationships, there's also lots of writing about how you should be more provocative and standoffish. So the buyers did not want that. What they wanted was to feel like the seller collaborated with them. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that in practice they don't come out the same way. So you actually do them similarly. But if I said to you as a seller, go collaborate with your buyers, or if I said to you as a seller, go challenge your buyers, if you weren't given any more information on that, you'd probably interpret them differently. What the buyers really valued in collaborating was not just having yes men next to them. It was more like they pushed my thinking. It was more like I found myself in a new learning zone outside of my comfort zone, and the seller might have been pushing back on me, but it was more like two senior executives locked in a conference room trying to figure out a strategy. Oh, and then one saying we should be doing this, and the other one saying, I don't know about that. This doesn't make sense to me. I mean, prove it to me. Make the case to me. Help me come around. Now tell it to me again. Why is that going to work? And they go back and forth. They must be arguing with each other. And then after an hour, when they're done trying to figure out answers to tough problems, they say, all right, what do you want to grab for lunch? So in practice, it might be a discussion that is not just coffee and a piece of pie. It's something that you can really get into, and the buyers love that as long as they perceive the seller to be on their team. So, any other thoughts, Mike, on collaborate before we bring it to a close?
I think you just hit a good point when it comes to like sellers being a little bit arrogant. And I mean, I've even gotten in, people who have listened in on my call sometimes will coach. I mean, it could be even little verbal cues that you do there. So for instance, I was on a call last week and I got a piece of feedback from somebody who was listening in on my call. Somebody asked me about a piece of our technology and how it works. And I said, oh yeah, this is really clever how we do this here. And I'll tell you about it. And the feedback that I was given after that call was like, when you talked about us as being clever, that could have potentially come off as really arrogant or a little bit cocky to the buyer. And we probably just want to not include that phrase and just go with a very thorough explanation. So it's not always like a tone of voice. It's not always the thing. It's just even the very little quips that you might just say in passing can always come off this way. So I would emphasize here, it's why it's great to have people listening in on your calls. It's great to have people who are willing to give you good feedback and listen to some of these recordings or even listen to the calls live.
Mm-hmm. So thanks, Mike. Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily just about, that you walk in and you have this air about you really being arrogant. People can be set off by almost anything. On the flip side, being really confident and loving what you have and loving what you do, if you characterize it right, people want to buy from passionate people. I mean, who wants Who wants to buy from a management consultant that's ho-hum? You want them to have a certain amount of confidence to say, we've helped clients make this change and be successful, and I feel really great about being able to do that with you. You want them to really stand behind what they have and love it, but you want to walk that line of confidence and cocky and make sure that you don't dip your toe too far over onto the other side. But I think that's really a great point. And as much as I've been doing this for a couple of decades and I write books on selling, and I'm in a situation all the time where I'm either selling or I'm seeing people selling or observing people selling or studying selling, I learn things all the time. And as a seller, if you keep learning, just like you are, even with the level of success that you've had, that's what makes for great and long careers. So just to summarize our points before we get to 10 minutes of Q&A, the sellers that win, all sorts of research, all sorts of fun stuff, they connect, they convince, and they collaborate. And we've made this handy-dandy summary side. The sellers that connect, that used to be enough to win, but now it's just the price of entry. It's necessary to do not throw it out, but it's not sufficient to really win maximum sales. The next level, and Mike, I love how you characterized this before because it's so key to this particular point, is that if you can't convince buyers that there's a maximum return, minimum risk, and you're the best choice, then they might just not do anything. And if they do something and you can't convince them that you're the best choice, they might just pick the other guy. Now, the last part, those things that really set the winners over the top, was when the buyers perceive them to be bringing new ideas to the table, and the buyers perceive them to be easy and good to work with, and the buyers perceive them to be on the same team, they became essential to the buyers. Not just the product, but the person and the team became essential to the buyer. And the sellers that did all three of these things together, they redefined that conversation at the end of the day, where one seller turns to the other and says, hey, how was your day? Oh, it was great. You know, I did this, I did that, I did this, I did that. And instead of saying, when he says to the other guy, how was your day? Instead of saying, I didn't sell anything either, it's, I closed the big deal. And if you do these things, you're going to find yourself saying that more often. So with that, I believe I'm turning it over to the folks at HubSpot just for a minute as we move along with a couple of more thoughts before we get to Q&A. Is that right? Or, you know what, I'll take this because it's my book. So Insight Selling is the book that just came out this month with all of this research and all of the various things on how to actually be an insight seller. Now, I know Amanda's going to push out a link right now so you can see to buy the book. You know, sorry for the technical difficulties earlier. So what I wanted to say was anyone that clicks the link and buys the book and just emails me today at mschultz@raingroup.com. That's mschultz@raingroup.com. I don't need proof or anything. All you have to do is email me and say, hey, I bought the book. I will connect you with 3 free online insight selling lessons, no strings attached. So just click on the link that's there, email me at mschultz, mschultz @raingroup.com, and I will hook you up with 3 free insight selling lessons. And now on to the folks at HubSpot to talk a little bit about Get Signals.
Thanks, Mike. For anybody who's on the call now who's starting to ask questions along the lines of, well, how can I really do insight selling? And is there an easy way for me to really be able to pick up a lot of these, skills and tactics without having to do any work? I think I have a solution for you. So what you can do is go to getsignals.com, and we will literally pass over all of the key insights to you to help you do insight selling. So what this tool does is it automatically integrates, it's a free tool, by the way, automatically integrates with your Gmail, your Microsoft Outlook, Apple Mail, whatever it is that you use, and it's going to give you real-time notifications when your prospects are opening your emails. If you put hyperlinks in your email, it'll give you information about which hyperlinks people are clicking and when they're coming back and revisiting that content. I found this to be a great way to know when the right time to reach out to my buyers is. I've found this to be a great way to know how to start the discussion with my buyers based on the things that I know they care about in the things I know they have questions about in the moment. It's a totally free app. Signals is by HubSpot. It's leading into our new sales software division. And you can get this now for free at getsignals.com. Would love for everybody to check it out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike and Mike. I know we've learned a lot on this webinar. Again, apologies for the problems at the beginning. I'm going to jump right into Q&A because there are a lot and I want to get to them all. The first one is for Mike from Rain Group. Mike, can you give us some examples of when you've actually used insight selling in action and be really as specific as you can? This person came in from Twitter and I'd love to give them some help.
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you one from our context. I mean, we see them in all sorts of contexts. But here's one for interaction insight. We, as many companies do, get requests for proposal. And one request for proposal came in and said, these are the people that we have, and here's what we want them to be able to do differently in selling. What we want is a 2-day class that covers these key points and help us get to these outcomes. Well, the problem with that is that learning for sellers in this particular industry, they're sophisticated people. It's a technology company. They're technologists. So instead of just responding to the RFP, which to our knowledge, which we learned later, everyone else just did that and said, here's what a 2-day course is, we talked with them about the outcomes that they were trying to get, and we shared with them that the solution that they picked is not enough of an engine to get them there, because adult learning is not about going to a 2-day class, coming out the other side like a car wash and being great at something. It's a practice. You have to get good at it. So it takes it's more of an initiative than it is a training class. And they threw out their RFP. Now, if we weren't willing to help them think differently, make sure that they saw that we didn't want to just sell them, and they were showing up with money in their hand, and they said, tell us this. And we said, we could, but it's not going to get you your outcome. So let's collaborate with you thinking about your goals, what's going to get you your outcome. And all of a sudden, there were no competitors, and there we were left standing at the end. So I'd also like to give one more thing, is that a lot of times, especially at companies of any size, a company might sell one thing to an account, but they have 5 other products or services, or even more. And they sell them things for years without even introducing the other ideas. So the question is, what other value, you have to ask yourself, what other value can you actually offer? And then how do you create meetings with your own buyers so that you can share with them the other differences that you can make? I won't tell a story about that, but I would encourage all of you to think, what aren't we selling to the other people, and should they be buying it? If the answer is yes, from their perspective, start to think about a process to make sure that that communication gets started with them.
Awesome. Thanks so much. That was such good information. Really appreciate that, Mike. Our next one comes from the chat handle here, and this is going to go to Mike from HubSpot. How do you suggest I write cold emails so that I get answers from my prospects?
Thanks, Amanda. This is a really common question that seems to always come up. I think the key here, this is a major tie-in with insight selling, and it's funny, it's almost doing insight selling previous to ever having a conversation with a customer. But those same steps of connecting with them and collaborating with them are just as key, and even more key in this communication. I think the number one thing you can do to get more people to write back to your cold emails is to be really well-researched. And I think for a lot of people, what being well-researched means is how many employees in their company, where are they headquartered, who's the point of contact that would typically buy my solution. That's all well and good. You're going to have to go deeper. So what problems are they trying to fix? This person who's your typical point of contact, what's their environment like? What are they trying to go for? What are their goals? Can you find blog posts that they've written where they've made comments on something? Can you find a time that they had a point of view online and reference it? What you really want to do here is you want to connect with the person by telling them why you're reaching out to them and having something more substantial than I'm trying to sell you, right? Identify to them what you believe their problem to be and tell them how you can begin to help them solve it. That's really the key, in my opinion. We'll paste a link into the chat pane here that is to a SlideShare presentation that we wrote up all on this, but it's essentially, to kind of quote Jeff Hoffman, who's another sales trainer in the Boston area, it's why you now. And the only way that you can really deliver this type of content most effectively is by being extremely well researched. On the SlideShare that we'll put out, there's a bunch of different tips on email subject lines. There's, a bunch of different kind of micro pieces in there that all go into it, words that you never want to use in your email, et cetera. But the real key is to have a basic understanding and collaborate with the folks before ever beginning the conversation.
Great. Thanks so much, and we'll paste that in there momentarily. Okay, the next question comes to Mike from Rain Group. It's so difficult because you both are named Mike here. The question is, if someone says that my solution that I'm trying to sell isn't for them, even though I know that it is, what should I do? What is the best tactic here?
Well, sometimes a good tactic is just to move on to someone else. So you know that the solution is for them, it's going to make the difference, but there are some people that buy innovative things and some people that don't. And if you can identify which ones are seeking a better future versus the ones that there are problems all around them and things they could do better, but they just don't care, or they're naturally not wired to take any kind of risk, then it's really an uphill battle to try to twist their arm and have them buy it. But I think that what you can do is not just accept that. So you can push back a little bit and try to understand why. So if they say, I appreciate the conversation, but I don't think it's for us, why? So what you find out, and sometimes you have to ask why a few times, because if you're like a really good friend of the family, she comes over and you ask her if she wants coffee, and she says, no, I don't want coffee. And I say, come on, let me get you some coffee. She says, no, it would be too much trouble. And I say, Mary, I'm going to make coffee for myself. Would you like some? Oh, if you're making some for yourself, I'd love a cup of coffee. Sometimes you have to ask a few times before people actually say what they're thinking. So you ask why. It might be, we're not big enough for this. Or it might be, it seems like it's too much work. Or it might be, I don't think that we'd use it. Or it might be, I just don't believe you. It seems too risky. If you can find out why, there might just be something that you can do about it. So, A, don't be afraid to move on if you think it's going to be an uphill battle, but don't just move on too easily. At least see if you can figure out what's going on, because it might just be something simple and a problem of communication versus a misalignment of actually doing something.
Awesome. Thanks. Now I really want a cup of coffee, so I'm going to go make one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that brings us right to 3 o'clock. Mike, do you have any final thoughts for our audience before we say goodbye and hope they have a great rest of the day?
Sure. Again, lots of research, lots of different things, but don't just listen to every piece of advice that you get from selling. Look into what's actually happening to make purchases go your way and go sellers' way. And at least for the research that we did, that for what's going on in the world right now, if you can connect, convince, and collaborate, you will find yourself in the winner's circle most often.
Awesome. Thanks. What a great way to end the webinar. And I hope that everyone that was able to stay with us during all of our issues really was able to learn something awesome. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Mike, thanks for coming on the call. I know I learned quite a bit. I'm actually not in the sales industry. I'm in marketing, so I really did learn quite a lot from this. I know that Mike from HubSpot really enjoyed his time on this webinar as well. So we didn't get to all the questions that everyone asked, but we will be creating some content that you can look for later on either Rain Group's blog or HubSpot's blog. We will be able to communicate that to all of you shortly. So thank you again, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.